We're joined now by Father Michael Lapsley, who is the founder of the Institute for Healing Memories, an Anglican priest and social justice activist. He lost an eye and both his hands in a letter bomb that was sent by the apartheid regime in 1990. We're also joined by Dr. Zulu Matabo Zulu, who is a heritage expert and director of Madisebo University. Thank you for being with us, both of you gentlemen. My first question, let's start with you, Father Lapsley. Should it be Human Rights Day, or should we be more specific about the horror of the day and call it Sharpeville Day?
I think that it's a false debate. Of course it was about Sharpeville. It was about the murder of unarmed protesters. The response to it worldwide was an international day against racial discrimination. And that was a good international response. And people were mobilized because of the horror of what happened at Sharpeville. But also as a nation, we know the issue of racism is fundamental, but also the discrimination against women is fundamental. Discrimination against people with disability, against discrimination against people of different sexual orientation. So I think, in fact, it's a progressive move to say it should be Human Rights Day. But that doesn't mean we ever forget the horror and the pain of what happened on that day.
Dr. Zulu, do you agree?
Yes, no, this is very important indeed, that we should not lose sight of the essence of the event that took place on the 21st March 1960. And I think it's noteworthy to say that the actual event began on the 20th, a day before. So there was a night-long vigil about their march, because they felt that there was a death, of their way of life. The songs that they were singing there, the theme song was saying Izwe, which means the return of the dispossessed land to the natives of the land. So actually the reclamation of the land was the essence of the struggle. And of course there was this urgent issue in front of them, which was about the past laws, and they need to take care of that. So this was really a tactical march in order to get rid of the past laws by basically yielding themselves for mass arrest. And I think it is very, very important that the name, like human rights, does not reflect that reality. And I think that's because there is no context in the name human rights. Of course, it is very good that the United Nations, of course, has that foregrounds that human rights, in the context of discrimination. But actually, the people on the ground, you see, for them, they still have the pain. I was speaking, for example, I was just speaking to the CEO of Sharpeville Massacre Foundation, and Madam Tswana Nhlapo, and then she was explaining to me about, for example, one family where they lost about 5 members. So I mean, it's like the whole family being wiped out on the 21st. And then, another case, a pregnant woman being shot, and then she survived, but the baby later died, And then there's also another case of another man, Daniel Machisana, who actually was gunned down, but he survived, but the bullet was embedded, in his body. And it remained embedded despite of hospital visits that he did. So it's very critical that the name of the day should incorporate the reality. Because if you say Heritage Day, and then, there's so many, if you say Human Rights Day, there's so many human rights out there, it doesn't really foreground that. And actually, when you go there on the ground, the people, for them, it is Sharpeville Massacre that took place. And that's what they remember. And this man, where the bullet is embedded in his body, he was saying repeatedly that I don't forget that day, and every Black family should teach their children about that day and should school the children. So it's very critical then that the name should have that context, because the context really, and taken from the Latin concept of contextus, it is really it's about joining together. So the Latin word for context means joining together, and that means that you join the text and the reality on the ground. But as it stands right now, it's only the text. human rights. But there is no reality connected to that.
So you said it would be more respectful to the people who lost loved ones or the people who survived. Father Lapsley, what do you think about that? And we spoke to an analyst, Taniko Maluleke, yesterday. He's been very strong on this, and he says what government's trying to do with Human Rights Day is manage the past rather than aggravate what happened in the past. But then he says we're just glossing over the truth. Like the doctor says, young people don't really learn the importance of the day. He even says we're telling ourselves lies.
Yes, I agree completely that we need to fully face the trauma and the horror of what happened. You can push it underground, but it doesn't go away. Like Dr. Zulu is saying, people still have the wounds in their bodies. The pain has gone from generation to generation. So I think in a way, Sharpeville Day brings into focus the degree to which we're still a traumatized nation and which the wounds are being passed from generation to generation. I was in support of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in terms of acknowledging the past, but we thought we could deal with 300 years in 4 or 5 years. And clearly we needed a much more profound national conversation that involves every single citizen in this country to speak about what we have done to each other and the consequences of that. And I think also that our failure to transform our society, that the President referred to us today correctly as the most unequal society on earth, keeps those wounds open. The more that we transform economically, the more the psychological, emotional, spiritual wounds will heal. People say, we sacrifice, but at least we see things changing. But when people see inequality getting worse, then those wounds remain open, gaping wounds.
And I want to talk to you further about the whole healing process that you've brought up. But firstly, Dr. Zulu, just finally on this debate of whether it should be called Sharpeville Day, Maluleke says there's also this political competition that we've seen since the dawn of democracy that maybe sees the achievements of the PAC, Robert Sobukwe, Black consciousness leaders being pushed aside a little bit. Do you agree?
Yes, and that's very sad indeed, because, I mean, for example, this whole anti-pass movement, it was really the initiative of the Pan-Africanist Congress, and we should not allow our ideologies, to dismiss other histories. For example, I'm an ANC cadre myself. I lived in the camp, but I am not fanatic to a point of excluding other people's views. That's why I was at the event that was organized by the Sharpeville Massacre Foundation. So it is very critical to do that. And just maybe to add another point in the context of the unequal aspect, I think South Africa, for example, the land of Azania, South Africa, I think they have actually lost the ball in terms of being the champions of a racist-free country. I'll give an example. I spent most of my life in Canada. Canada actually is doing better in terms of fighting racism than South Africa is, and it's a shame. For example, in South Africa, they've got what is known as the Child Protection Service. So if, for example, a family raises their children in a racist way, the Child Protection Service actually come with the social workers and the police and the ambulance, and they'll actually take the child away from the biological parents, you see, and get a court order, and then that child is going to be given up for adoption to a family that will raise that child according to the Canadian values of non-racist society. So in South Africa here, the racist parents who raised their children in a racist way, they do as they please. There is no intervention coming from society. And
it is taught behavior. Doctor, I'm going to stop you there because I just want to throw a final question to Father Lapsley. We are running out of time. But I guess we wouldn't have any fear of opening up the wounds of the past if we felt as a nation we had gone through that proper healing. Like you say, it's still outstanding. All these years later, you are also somebody who bears the injuries in your body from apartheid times. Just tell us about what you think should be happening now.
I think we need a national conversation about inequality and the economic model that has failed fundamentally, but we equally need a national conversation about our pain and our woundedness. To do that, we need a different kind of language, the language of pain, the language of our emotions, because otherwise we will, if we don't, the cliche goes that if we don't transform our past, we transmit it from generation to generation. So we need to have a new facing of what the truth of what we've done to each other. So we've got to deal with the psychological, emotional, and spiritual, and acknowledge to one another the truth of what happened, even as we struggle economically and socially to transform our nation.
All right, thank you very much. That was Father Michael Lapsley, founder of the Institute for Healing Memories, and Dr. Zulu Matabo Zulu. He's a research scientist and director at Madisebo University Research Institute.